Now, before we jump into the questions here, really important, get ready to stay focused, put away all your distractions. We're going to move quickly, and what we're going to cover in this video can help you improve your score by up to 50 points on your SAT. At the end of the video, I'm going to talk about some bonus topics and resources you can use to help you make even greater increases in your score before test day. Now, this first topic that we're going to see on the test is what is called conditional probability. And although this may sound really difficult and tricky, it's very easy once we understand the principle, and it often shows up towards the end of the second harder math module. So this is weighted as a very difficult question, so it can make a big impact in your score. So here we're going to use this same table for both questions. If one of the 400 voters in the table is selected at random, what is the probability of selecting a voter from state B given the voter is not a liberal? Whenever you see any sort of given statement on the SAT, what you want to be really careful of is this is your condition. And here, since we're saying given the voter is not a liberal, that simply means we're going to strike this entire part of the table out. And essentially, after we've strucken out that condition, we can now go back and reread this question. If one of the 400 voters in the table is selected at random, what is the probability of selecting a voter from state B? Now, since we've gotten rid of that part, it's very easy for us to go through. Well, state B is going to be the 90 plus 80, which is going to give us 170, and it's going to be out of our total of 250. So your answer is simply going to be 17 over 25, or the decimal equivalent. Now, same thing here. Pause the video, take a shot at this one. Here, what is the probability of selecting a voter, conservative voter, given the voter is not from state A? Well, first thing we're going to do is strike out state A, given they're not from state A. Now we're looking for what is the probability of selecting a conservative voter. Well, this is going to be 90 out of our 90 plus 30 plus 80. So this is going to be out of 200, or this is going to simplify to 9 out of 20. Anytime you see given statements on the test, especially when you're dealing with these probability tables, read through, follow these steps, and you're going to get it right. Now, the next thing you're going to see on your test is going to be one of my favorite test tricks. And this often feels a little bit mind-blowing for a lot of students because so many of them struggle with this type of question and it can show up a few times on your SAT. So just getting this down could help you improve your reading and writing score by 20, 30 points in a second. And this is being able to identify subject-verb agreement questions and exploit a flaw on the SAT. Now, what you want to make sure you're spotting here is singular versus plural conjugations. Subject-verb agreement is all about if you have a singular subject, you need to conjugate a verb in a singular way. Plural, you need to do it in a plural way. So we could say like he or she was, they were. If we see those singular versus plural conjugations, that's my first red flag. We're dealing with subject-verb agreement and not some other verb-related question like parallel structure or tense. In our real confirmation, we're dealing with subject-verb agreement, which is going to let us exploit this flaw in the SAT, is we're going to see what we can call the odd one out. This means you're going to see 3 singular conjugations versus 1 plural, or 3 plural conjugations versus 1 singular. Now you're probably asking yourself, how am I supposed to tell if it's singular or plural? Because when we grow up speaking English, we don't learn all of these formal rules. Well, it's a really simple thing. You're just going to plug in he or she, and you're going to plug in they, and you'll see only one is going to be the odd one out. It's only going to work with one and not work with the other as you go through. So we could say they were, they have been, they are. You cannot say they was. That sounds very bizarre, but we could say he or she was. There is your odd one out. That's your correct answer. Now, this next concept is incredibly commonly tested. There's quite a few varieties of these, but this is what is called a discriminant question. Now, this is the other type of solution question you can see on the test. We talked about our linear ones with lines and systems of equations, but if you're dealing with a quadratic and you see a question talking about the number or type of solutions, you want to have immediate alarm bells going off in your head that this is a discriminant question. The discriminant is just the part underneath the square root of the quadratic formula, but this is going to let you determine the number or type of solutions for a quadratic. And you want to make sure you have these 3 scenarios memorized. If you have no real solutions, b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, and here are your other 2 cases. So here, as long as we can identify our a, b, and c values, we can just plug this into the formula and we can solve through. And we'll talk about one tricky step at the end. So here our a value is 1, b is negative 56, and c is c. So we're simply going to do negative 56 squared minus 4 times 1 times c is less than 0. And so from here, as long as we can punch this in the calculator properly, we should be able to work through. This is going to give us that 3,136 minus 4c is less than 0. We're going to jump over here. 3,136 is less than 4c. We can divide both sides by 4. And when we do so, we are going to get that 784 is less than c. And now we get to this last little tricky part that the SAT likes to throw in these questions to make your life more confusing. If c is greater than k, what is the least possible value of the integer k? Well, c is greater than 784. That's our inequality. This is the least possible value for that to be true. It has to be greater than 784 for us to have no real solutions. So although it feels a little tricky at the end, 784 is just your value. It's the same thing here. We've just flipped this inequality. So 784 is the least possible value of the integer k. So one of the next things you're going to see are questions about no solutions, infinite solutions, and one solution. And we're going to start with the variety around linear equations, which is the same for system of equations. If stuff has infinitely many solutions, it just means the equations are absolutely identical. So for a really simple example of this, this would be something like 2x plus 5 equals 2x plus 5. If we have no solutions, we're going to have the same slope, but we're going to have a different y-intercept. So that'd be something like 2x plus 3 equals 2x plus 5. And if we have one solution, we just need the slopes to be different. Now, as we go to system of equations, that exact same concept comes into play. So if we're looking for essentially infinite solutions with system of equations, it has to be something like this. 2x plus 3y equals 8. And then we could see 4x plus 6y is equal to 16. For the system to have infinitely many solutions, they need to be identical, but this just tells you they need to be a multiple of each other. And with these ones, if we took our top equation and we multiplied by 2, it would be the exact same as our bottom equation. And one of the other things that we want to notice, which takes place in really tricky questions like this, is essentially between all of our different terms, the multiple is the same. So as 2 is to 4, 3 is to 6, and 8 is to 16. And this is the concept that we can use here to solve this question that feels like it's missing too much information for us to be able to solve it. So all you actually need if you're looking for infinite solutions is to see one pair of coefficients. If we have our x coefficients, our y coefficients, or our numbers. So essentially what we know here is 3/5 is to 7/11 is a is to c. So although the question feels really tricky, it's actually as simple as doing 3/5 over 7/11 is equal to a over c. So if we want to solve this all the way out by hand, I would just do 3/5 times 11 over 7 is equal to a over c. If we're dividing by a fraction, it's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. This would give us that 33 over 35 is equal to a over c, and that will give you your correct answer. Now, the next thing you're going to see on your test is what I call advanced unit conversion questions. And these involve squared or cubed units. So we're going to start with a simpler one before we get to this very advanced variety. But once we understand these principles, we're going to improve your unit conversion skills and help you avoid the common mistake with these. A certain town has an area of 5.48 square miles. Which of the following is closest to the area in square yards of this town? Now, the easiest way that I found for students to do this is we're just going to write out our first units. So 5.48, and now the part you want to be super careful about is this is square miles. So we're just going to do miles squared, and we're going to put it over 1 so we can do our unit conversion. Now, what we know is our conversion factor is 1 mile equals 1,760 yards, and we're trying to get this into square yards. So we always want to make sure that our units are cross-canceling with these, so we're going to put it over 1 mile. But the really important thing to do here is we have miles squared. This is the whole trap and why the SAT really loves these questions. You need to square your conversion factor because we're dealing with square miles. If it was cubed, you would cube your conversion factor. So what we're really simply doing here is 5.48 times 1,760 squared, and that will give us our answer of D. Now, as we go over to 21 here, this is supposed to be one of the hardest questions on a test. It's sitting in the last two questions. It's very simple, similar principles, but we're going to add a little bit of complexity. So take a shot at this one on your own, but we're going to break this down now. So we're told that the area of a rectangular region is increasing at a rate of 250 square feet per hour. So we're going to do our 250 feet squared over 1 hour. And whenever you see per in these questions, per is kind of a math code word for divide. So now we're trying to get this into square meters per minute. So first thing we can just do is we can take care of our feet in meters. And we're going to follow the same principle we just did here. So we have feet squared and we want to get into meters squared. So now we're going to put our 1 meter over our 3.28 feet. But what we have to remember is since our units were squared, we have to square the conversion factor. We've knocked out step 1. Now step 2 is going to be, we want to go from hours to minutes. So since we have our hours on the denominator, we know in 1 hour there are 60 minutes. And now we just get to punch this into our calculator. Essentially all we are doing is 250 divided by 3.28 squared divided by 60, and that's going to give us our correct answer here. So as we punch that on in, that is going to give us our correct answer here of A. Now, the next thing that you're definitely going to see on your real SAT are very confusing, overwhelming scientific passages, especially in that second harder reading and writing module. So I'm just going to break back down the key parts of this, so make sure you read through the passage, try to work through this, see if you can work through it in under about 2 minutes here, and then we're going to break down the strategies around it. Now, whenever you see these passages, first read, you should push the pace a little bit and just get a good lay of the land. You're trying to understand generally what's happening, but here we're looking to support the conclusion. Once we get to the conclusion, we want to be very careful about what it is we're concluding. We want to start thinking about what parts of the passage related to that. And then on second read, we're going to really pull out the relationships to unpack it so we can really track what's happening with the answers. The challenge that I see with so many students with these questions is they read through, they just go and read through the answers, they start finding all these little details, and their head just starts spinning and they get totally overwhelmed and lost. But if we institute a little bit of a system, we can work through these a lot more easily. So here our conclusion is that net CH4 is going to increase as more forest is converted into pastures. So basically, we just want to see CH4 going up. So what this now tells me is I want to pay close attention as I go back through the passage about what details talk about what shows an increase of CH4 and what shows a decrease of CH4. If I can track that, I'm going to be able to work through the answers a lot more efficiently. And what we see is converting Amazonian forest into pastures has altered the microbial communities in the forest, potentially facilitating an increase in methanogenesis, a form of anaerobic respiration that generates CH4. So what we now know is if we have an increase of methanogenesis, we're going to have an increase of CH4. So these two things are essentially positively correlated, but also potentially facilitating an increased absorption of CH4. So that if we're absorbing it, we're going to be taking it away through a proliferation of methanotrophs. So if we have more methanotrophs, we are going to get less CH4 as we go through. So what we want to do if we want to show an increase of CH4 is we want more methanogenesis and we want less of the methanotrophs because more of those is going to reduce the CH4. And if we're able to unpack that, we can work through our answer choices and we can find our correct answer. And this is why I recommend using scratch paper on reading for these difficult passages because you can really break them down a lot more efficiently. And that's exactly what C says. Conversion of the Amazonian forest into pastures changes microbial communities in soil, resulting in a greater proportion of microbes undergoing methanogenesis. That's what we're looking for, in reducing the proportion of methanotrophs. That's the second thing we're looking for. That's how we can see that that is correct. Now, if we look at all the other answer choices, this one is showing an increase in both. That's missing on our second part. B results in reduction of methanogenesis. Well, we want an increase of that. And D, conversion of Amazonian forests into pastures diminishes both the frequency of the microbes undergoing methanogenesis and the percentage of methanotrophs. Well, we need to see an increase of this, not a decrease of that as we go through. That's how we can see that C is our correct answer. Now, if you're looking for more practice with questions like this that are truly reflective of the difficulty of what you're going to see on test day, I recommend checking out our practice test. This is straight from our practice test number 4. I've written these to really be it or above the difficulty of test day because so many students struggle with the Blue Book tests not being reflective of the difficulty and the question types that they actually see on their test. You can check out our first practice test for only $10 with the coupon code PREP10, but all the practice tests are also available in our Ultimate SAT course, so that's by far the best value to help you really improve as you close in on test day. Now, the next thing you're going to see are margin of error questions, and what makes these so tricky is most students have just never taken stats in school, so when they get these questions on the SAT, they literally have no idea what they're supposed to be looking for. But there's a really common concept that they like to test on, and this is the relationship between sample size and margin of error. Very simply, as sample size increases, margin of error decreases. As sample of size decreases, margin of error increases. So here, we're saying which of the following is the most appropriate reason that the margin of error for sample A is greater than margin of error for sample B? Well, it's because A is going to have a smaller sample size than B, and that's how we can see that B is our correct answer. These show up in that second harder math module, and they're basically free points for the taking if you just remember this one simple rule. Now, the next concept you're going to see, and this one trips a ton of students up, is percent increase or decrease. Now, if we're showing a percent increase of something, we're expressing it as 1 plus that percent expressed in decimal form, and percent decrease, it's 1 minus. So, for instance, let's say we're showing a 50% increase. Well, that would be the same as doing 1 plus 0.5, or 1.5 would show us a 50% increase. Now, if they said something was 1.5 times greater than something else, and it asked you for what percent greater it is, the way that you can always approach this is once you know what your multiple is, and we're going to connect this back to the question in a second, you will simply say that that multiple is equal to 1 plus p, and that's going to give you your percent in decimal form. So here we'd subtract over the 1, we'd get that 0.5 is equal to p. Then when you want to put it in percent form, you're going to multiply by 100. So you'd get that 1.5 is showing you a 50% increase. If you can remember this little series of steps, you can take any of these very sneaky questions and get them right. So 81 is x percent greater than 9. Well, the first thing we want to do is figure out what the multiple is. Well, 81 divided by 9 is just going to equal 9. So now all we have to do is we have to say 1 plus p is equal to 9. And now from here, we're going to subtract over the 1. We're going to get that p is equal to 8. And then we just have to remember that final step. We're going to multiply it by 100. And that is going to show us that 81 is 800% greater than 9. The mistake that students make is 81 is 900% of p, but it is 800% greater. That's where if you can just remember this 1 plus p trick, you're going to be able to work through these questions and not make the super common mistake the SAT is hoping you're going to make on test day. Now, we're going to close off the video with 2 of the most commonly tested and most missed grammar concepts that show up on the SAT. So mastering these can really make a big difference in your reading and writing score. So here in 2023, acclaimed English director Carrie Cracknell modernized the classical 4-act story of George Bizet's Carmen. Well, that's an independent clause. With a staging that could not be more relevant today, Cracknell explores themes of gendered violence, abusive labor structures, and the desire to break through societal boundaries. We have another full sentence independent clause coming afterwards. So we have 2 independent clauses. The only one which gives us any of our 3 possible ways of joining those 2 independent clauses together is going to be the period, and that's how we can tell it's correct. Now, in this video, I'm not going to break down the types of independent and dependent and phrases and how you can spot those because those are all covered in depth in my free trial. You don't need a credit card. It's truly completely free, but please go there if you're not familiar with those rules. It's going to give you really in-depth lessons, and it's going to make a huge impact on your score. You're also going to get to learn a little bit of helpful math stuff and take a look at some advanced math questions as well that we're going to talk about later in the video. Now, the other type of question, and this still requires the same ability of being able to identify independent and dependent clauses, are what I call tricky transitions. These show up almost every single SAT, sometimes a few times, and they give students a ton of trouble. Now, the first thing you want to do if you see these types of questions with commas surrounding transitions or comma transition semicolon or semicolon transition comma is to totally ignore the transition and check the clauses. They were not the first in England to adopt the literary modes of classical antiquity. That's an independent clause. Independent means it can stand and function on its own. Some of the most prominent figures of the early Renaissance period were also influenced by ancient Greek and Roman literature. This is also independent. So this is going to give us another of the ways that we can join those independent clauses together. You cannot join them with just commas, so we can knock off both A and B. Now, the second part that makes these tricky transition questions is you have to be able to understand what the difference is contextually between answer choice C and answer choice D. Well, what C is really saying is you should be able to take this, however, and pop it back at the front of this sentence, because what this structure is saying is the transition's working back to the left to show a contrast between sentence 1 and sentence 2. What D is saying is the transition is good right where it's at because it's showing a contrast between sentence 2 and sentence 3. C is typically the correct answer, so it's a great one to start by checking. During the English neoclassical period, many writers imitated the epic poetry and satires of ancient Greek and Rome. However, they were not the first in England to adopt the literary modes of classical antiquity. That makes perfect sense. We're showing a contrast between those two sentences. That's how we can see that C is our correct answer. Now, as I said at the front of the video, I'm also going to talk through some additional resources to help you further improve your score. What I recommend for all of you, because it is totally free and it really can help you, is to check out the free trial to my Ultimate SAT course. You're going to learn those really important grammar concepts. We're going to make sure you're comfortable with independent, dependent phrases, the rules around joining those. And I'm also going to list some questions below in the Chapter 12 part of the free trial and the Advanced Math course part of the free trial that are question types that I have a strong probability of showing up on your May SAT, so they would be great to go through and work through to help you learn some additional skills. Now, outside of that, I'm going to talk through a few different scenarios and resources that can help you further improve. There's 3 typical scenarios as we close in on test day. The most common is the students who have done a poor job of prepping or haven't had as much time on their hands, and they just want to improve on the easiest to improve places on the test and learn the concepts that are going to show up every single SAT. If that is the case for you, there is no better resource than my SAT crash course. It's just focused on the quick to learn, impactful places we can improve your score. So you can check that out in the link to the description below. Now, one of the second really common scenarios for students is students are really just struggling on that second harder math module. If that is the scenario for you, there is no better resource than our advanced math courses. These have been used by tons of students, and they're really focused just on those last handful of question types and the question types that we can expect to see and have seen across the digital SAT administrations. And the final scenario is students who have a little bit more time on their hand and students who want additional practice tests. Now, if you want additional practice tests, this is something I've been working on for the past year to really make sure our practice tests are truly reflective of the question types and difficulty that students are seeing on test day. So those tests are available for purchase on their own now on our website, and you can check out the first one, test 1, for only $10 with the code PREP10. We have 5 of those there. If you have more time on your hands and you want to kind of learn all of the concepts, get access to the practice test, get access to advanced math course number 1, all of our other courses to make a really big impact on your score in a short period of time, I strongly recommend checking out the Ultimate SAT course. And if you're going to take the test again in June, this is a fantastic resource. There's over 100 hours of content in there. We now have 6 practice tests available in there. We're going to have additional ones available before June. But this is really going to give you an A to Z, everything you can see on the SAT course. And it's worked wonders for so many students already this past year, and I know it can do the same for you. If you guys have any questions at all heading into your test, please drop them in the comments below.